Today we're looking at Proverbs 23. Again, 35 verses here. Just some good weightlifting for our minds. Perspective. What I really liked in 22 was we were talking about it more from, monetary, from business oriented, not being slothful, being a good worker, etc. We tend to take these as, again, just second nature, but not everybody has these concepts. Not everybody has these understandings. We're looking at 23. It's more about, again, social etiquette. When you sit down with a ruler, consider diligently what is put before you. Put a knife to your throat if you're given to appetite. You don't want to be a pig. You don't. And it seems counterintuitive. It's like, well, duh. But there's not a lot of people that have this. I grew up without a lot of this. I think a young man should read Proverbs before he goes out into the world. This will give you a good grounding on how to deal with people, how to deal with feelings, how to deal with basic understandings of the world. Be not desirous of his dainties, for they are deceitful meat. Be careful also, and this is figuratively. Jesus talked about this when he said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Be careful also what you're eating from other people. Not just in the food, but what are you consuming from other people? What ideas, opinions, philosophies are coming from them? But also, don't be a pig. It talks about riches. Labor not to be rich, for thine own wisdom. Cease from thine own wisdom. Wilt thou set eyes upon them that is not? The riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away. This is the funny thing about riches. It flies away. As soon as you have a dollar, you've lost a dollar. This chasing of riches. He talks about that. Eat not the bread of him that has an evil eye. He that thinketh in his heart he is, eat and drink, saith he to thee, but his heart is not with thee. This guy he's not your friend. He wants to bring you in. He's like a con man, a confidence man. He's here to bring you in. You've got something he wants. And it's always that way, whether it's the strange woman or the strange man. Men will get you for your energy. They'll take you for their money. They want to bring you into their fold so they can use you or take your resources. I've had men swindle me out of things, and I thought they were my friends, but they didn't have me in thought. They had what they could get from me. It talks about the morsel which you've eaten shall you'll vomit up, and lose thy sweet words. You'll vomit up. Even though they gave you sweet things, you're going to vomit it back. Remove not the old landmark, and enter not into the fields of the fatherless. Talking about how we do things, and leave things where they're at. The balances, the statutes, especially those that are from God. Sometimes the traditions that we have need to be held on to. But again, God establishes the boundaries. So if God establishes your boundaries, then stay within those boundaries. Apply your heart into instruction, and thine ears to the words of knowledge. Withhold not instruction from the child, for when you beat him with a rod, he shall not die. If you need to correct someone, don't worry, they're not going to die. Correct them. The world is going to use a rod, by the way. People talk about that, oh, you shouldn't spank your children. I tell you what, the spankings of a parent with love and with understanding and with control is different than how they're going to be destroyed out in the world if they don't correct these behaviors. He goes on and talks about this, about let not your heart envy sinners. I love that one. For surely there is an end of thine of thine expectation shall not be cut off. There's an end to that. If you love what they have and you get what they have, that's the end. You get no more. Be not among the wine bibbers, among riotous eaters of flesh, for the drunkard and the gluttonous shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. Again, gluttony, overeating. I'm just eating for my stomach. Drunkenness, excuse me, it'll cover you with rags. The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy in him. Again, talking about this family joy of having wise children. Children have understanding. We go through this. For a whore is a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit. She also lieth in wait for her prey, and increases the transgressors among men. She creates war between men. She has men fight over her, even though neither one of them will possess her. She loves to watch two men fight. You see this sometimes with modern women. They'll have a boyfriend, and they'll tease with another boyfriend and flirt, and just watch the two men fight over her. It fills her, it fills her self-esteem somehow. She thinks she has value if men are fighting over her. We get into talking about more of this, about wine, how bad it is. And we finished this whole thing talking about how bad wine and drink is in excess. You know, he even describes here at the end of 30, I mean, at the end of 23, it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. Your eyes will behold strange women, and your heart will say perverse things. All of a sudden, women become strange, and all of a sudden, you find yourself saying things that you wouldn't normally say. Yea, thou shalt say, I'll be him that lieth down in the midst of the sea, and he that is upon the top of a mast. They have stricken me, and you will say, I am not sick, and they have beaten me, but I am not. When I awake, I will seek to do it again. This is drunkenness. Let me slow down because I read it pretty fast. With the idea that you'll go after things that you wouldn't normally go after. You'll say things you normally won't say. You'll feel like you're in a ship at the top of a mast, weaving around, and you'll do this, and you'll say, "They've stricken me, but I'm not sick." You've had that feeling, and they beat me, but I don't have any marks. And they'll go wake up and chase after all of that again. The drunkenness feeling is right here at the end of 23. This whole thing is again about staying away from drunkenness, staying away from strange women, and being careful how you deal in those situations. Again, you get the idea that all of 23 is about a feast went wrong. You went over to a man's house to have a feast, and all of a sudden it goes wrong. There's strange women there. There's all kinds of drinks. There's all kinds of foods. There's men there that have philosophical understandings, or hey, I'll be your friend, but they've got something they want from you. Be careful of all of that. In wisdom instructions, stay away from all of that. 23 is wonderful. I love 22 and 23, but that's really good analysis of 23. Going back to First Chronicles, I feel like I'm going fast through Chronicles, but it's well-worn ground. We've already covered this ground before, so I can go a little faster. I'm not trying to. Plus, the chapters are a little smaller than they were in Kings. Kings might have 35, 40 verses. Here we're seeing, 27 or even 16. Going back to just cover some ground. In 10, we got away from the chronologies and the genealogies. In 10, we talk about, again, the precursor to David was the death of Saul and Jonathan. In 11, we see David coming up, and we see him taking Jerusalem for himself. Hold on a minute. Trying to get rid of that. The idea of he's taking Jerusalem, the Jebusites there, and he goes and takes that ground and establishes the city of David. Now, he had Ziklag at that time. He could have just stayed. I'm going to ignore it. It's back. He could have just stayed. I'm not going to ignore it. It's bothering me. It's an old computer. Sorry about that. It may go away. It may not. Ah, there it goes. Okay. I'm going to leave that in. So we have David. He establishes himself at the city of David, at Jerusalem, even though he has Ziklag, and Ziklag is in Judah, but so is Jerusalem. He establishes himself there. He talks about his mighty men. He talks about his military. He talks about the men available to him that are of Israel. Now, he has some other groups, these mercenaries that Benaniah is over. We've talked about them. And they're from other areas. And there are men also who are tying into this army. And yeah, they're fed and taken care of by Israel, but they're not Israelites. And so are the men who were in the army of David are fed and taken care of. So we talk about all of his wonderful army of men in 11. We talk about him and Ziklag, and we talk about how he has different groups from Gad and Manasseh, and then we talk about his military. And you're talking about military might all through 12, and I love that. We tend, but there's something interesting about the fact that we're dealing with military now. Why didn't we tell stories on a very basic level, and then we're talking about the strength of Jerusalem, the strength of Israel. And I think that's important. Look what God is focusing on. Not just the history of what the kings are doing, but the strength of the people and the strength of the men surrounding the king. In 13, we talked about how he came in and wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant in, but he did it really sloppily. They just put it on a cart. They rustled it around. They didn't show it the respect that God had done, and a man died. And David realizes, wait, this is messed up. So he leaves it at the house of Obed-Edom, a Gittite, and it stayed there, and it blessed the house because of it being there. We talk about Hiram coming into play, and he is building, with David, building David's house. And David goes and talks about his family real quick. And then he talks about his strength over the Philistines. Again, he's taken in. Remember the story? I'm going to ignore that. We're going to the story of the mulberry bushes and the story about how God sent him he went against the Philistines, and the Philistines were the first time he asked that David asked God, "Yeah, should I attack the Philistines? Go and attack." Second time he asked Yahweh, Yahweh said, "No, follow me." And again, we see David not just, he goes to God in every instance to see what God wants. Not just, well, I'm the king and you said take the Philistines, so I'm going to do this the same all the time. No, every different battle needs to go back and see how God wants to handle it. Sometimes God has the battle is established for you to win. Sometimes the battle is established for God to win. He wants to get the glory. Sometimes he'll have you get the glory in doing something. Sometimes he wants to get the glory. We always say all of God and none of me, all of God and none of me. Well, that's the opposite. That's where we sit around going, well, if God wants to win the battle, he'll go win the battle. And if he doesn't, well, I guess he didn't. No. Talk to him. He might say, you have the resources to win this battle. Go win it. And so here he has this. And the other times it's going to take my resources to win this. So again, let God be God in the situations and not, or man be God. Man, deciding to acquiesce to, well, God will do it and I'm not doing anything, is just as wrong as taking the forefront every time. In 15, he talks about establishing the Levites, and that's very good. He establishes these men. Many of them also were singers, and I talked about that. In 16, we talk about the ark of God coming in and how everyone was rejoicing. Everyone was rejoicing. There was this great, all Israel came to Jerusalem. All Israel was encamped around in the cities around there, and all rejoicing was going on. He even gave his wonderful soliloquy where he talks about how wonderful God is in a psalm in 17, and he goes on through the psalm talking about how great and just builds and builds. And at the end, the people departed, and they didn't depart empty-handed. They had meat, they had wine, they had good feelings, they had merriment. They could take back to their houses and continue this feasting, this joy before the Lord. They continue it in their own houses. In 17, we have him talking with Nathan, and he's wanting to build this house of God. If you remember that from Samuel, how he wants to build the house of God. And first Nathan says, okay, cool. But then God comes to him and comes to Nathan and says, tell him that you can't build it. You're a man of blood. You're a man of war. This will be built by a man of peace. And again, if you wanted to draw it out a little bit, this will be made by a prince of peace. Again, kings were princes before they were kings. So we get this prince of peace kind of thing going on here. Again, Jesus was the man of war who took back what was taken from God, and that was us, if we're willing to come in through faith. Second time he comes back, he's going to be a prince of peace, setting up his kingdom. Of course, there is a little war that goes on as he takes this kingdom one more time, and then he'll be the prince of peace, establishing this kingdom in the millennial reign. So there's a lot of typology here. So he gets this from David, and David is astounded and is like, who am I? Who am I that you would even do this? Who am I that I would even come up? Who am I that you would even take me? And so he talks about how God talks a lot here, how he established it and he adorned the place, and this is his place. And moreover, I will subdue all thine enemies. I will be here. I will not just be watching. I will not just be a bystander. I will be the king of this place, and I will subdue your enemies. I will take care of this. I will create through you a strong economy. I will do this. I will do that. He's got that I am and I will. We know with Moses, he became the I am. I am the I am. Well, here he is the I will, I will. Same thing, same concept. God is always active. I am almost seems like he's sitting in a chair going, all right, I will is an active word. He's telling David, I am going to be active when I establish myself. If I put my presence in this place, I will be active here. and I will subdue. You come to me, I will be the king. You come to me, I will be the leader. You come to me, I will work out the economy. You come to me, I will give blessings. What happens in tragedy is he establishes this Davidic covenant through David to have a king established, but later on, they don't want him to be king right after Solomon. They don't want him to be king. They do want him to be king, then they don't, and he winds up wiping it all out. But he brings it back in the remnant and establishes it up through today, and he's going to really establish it when Jesus comes back and sets up his reign to connect all those long dots. But here he's talking about I will, and he shall build me a house. That's talking about the Son, and I will put my throne there forever. When God talks, watch every word. If he says forever, he means forever. That's what he means. I will be his father, and he shall be my son, talking about Solomon. And he establishes this. And David gets in and says, who am I? And there is none like thee. Neither there is any God besides thee, according to all that you've heard from our ears. And he goes on talking about the wonders of God. Let it be established that thy name be magnified. He's just rejoicing in this, that you will even do this through my son. You won't do it through me, but you'll do it through my son. In 18, we see him smiting. He's going around and he's got to establish peace. Again, peace with the Philistines. So he has to go to war with the Philistines. He smites Moab. He goes in and takes care of them. He has to deal with the Syrians in Damascus. So he's fighting a frontal war, first to the south. Then he'll go over to the east. Now he's got to go up north and push back again, pushing back from these forces that want to come in. We have to realize these people are not, the Philistines and the Syrians and them are not just sitting around watching this happen. You know, they're still wanting that land back. They still have anger with David. They still have all of this animosity. As soon as Israel gets weak, these people pounce. They're like hyenas. But he's got to keep these at bay. He's got to keep them in check. He's got to keep them in tribute. At this time, either you were the king or you were someone else's servant. There was no middle ground. There wasn't thus, you live and let live. You just do yourself over there. You had to, it's again with sin. Sin has to be subdued. You can't have sin just existing. Okay, you stay in your corner, pornography, and we'll be fine. You stay over there, anger, we'll be fine. You stay over there, depression, and we'll all live in the same space. No, they have to be cast out. You have to fight against them. You've got to keep them out every time they come in. Here, David's doing this, and he goes through. He establishes his servants with Hadazerah. Hold on a minute. Hadarezer. He is the king of Syria, and he's got this problem with Syria, and he goes and again establishes dominion with Syria and puts them under tribute. And I know this sounds horrible to our 21st century ears, but we have to realize God needs to establish his righteousness and wants to. We see that the sins of the nations come back. They come back. It's like a floodgate. You're pushing back these floods. You're setting up this place for God to reign in goodness through his standards and through his commandments and through his economy and his righteousness and his holiness. And these floodgates want to come in and just flood it with filth and sin and death and murder and blood and filthiness of eating and filthiness of sexual habits and filthiness in the way they live their lives. And then they're still going to fight with one another. Moab will still fight with Ammon. Ammon will still fight with Edom. Edom will still fight with the Philistines. And this just goes on and on. God wants to establish a beachhead that people might come to him and worship him and have the goodness of this God, this creator God, this Elohim God for them. I push that really hard because we have this live and let live, and it looks like God's the bad guy, but you got to flip the script. When you make God the good guy, and he is, then you see all these others as the bad guy. They are wrong for living their philosophies. They are wrong for living their economies and treating their women and treating their kids and treating the poor, treating the stranger the way they are. And God needs them under tribute or they will want to take control. And we see that happen, unfortunately, later on with Manasseh and some of the others. So he goes in, and here he's dealing with this fellow. And he also puts garrisons down in Edom. And Joab goes in and works also. And there's Zadok the priest is there. And he's a strong man, by the way, when we think of a priest. We think of a fellow who stands around in a white robe and just waves an incense. He was a warrior too. There were many Levite valiant warriors in Levi. Just because they had on the white robe, just because they wore, they shaved their heads and took vows, doesn't mean that they couldn't sling a sword. These were men of power. These were men of valor. These were men of courage. They could have taken their warrior energy into the battlefield, but they're taking that warrior energy into establishing and worshiping Jehovah God. So we see him work in 17 and 18. We're here in 17 again. He wants to build a house. Nathan says no. God tells him why and what it's about, but he'll do it through his son, and David magnifies that. Then we see in 18 how that he has to go and take care of his enemies, those to the south. And again, Edom is in the south, so all around him, except for the Mediterranean Sea, there's nobody there. To the north and to the east and to the south, he is subduing his enemies because God knows that and he puts them under tribute because that's the establishment of God, that this would be a place of God. And it begins at Jerusalem. We see everything coming back to Jerusalem. Everything goes to Jerusalem. Right now, Chronicles is centering around Jerusalem. We went from the world to the region to the area, and now we're dealing with a city. It's very important we see what God is saying in Chronicles and not just reading his history, because he's ignoring a lot of history. We haven't talked about a lot of things that went on, but we're talking about David the king, and we're talking about Jerusalem. So far, that's all this is about. We need to let God speak instead of us bringing in suppositions, assumptions, and conclusions. Just let God speak. Thank you.